Hi, welcome to another edition of Engineering with Lego Bricks and Robolab. I'm Eric Wong, and I'll be your host. Okay, let's quickly go over default settings, what is a modifier, and the color coding of modifiers. First, let's look at this program. So I got a program, very, very simple program, won't do much. It starts, it waits for the light sensor to get brighter, it fills a container with a certain value, it waits a certain amount of time, and then ends. It's not very interesting, but it does compile. So I could press the white arrow and it would download to the ArchText just fine. The questions I have is, well, which light sensor is it going to use, and how much change is it going to wait for? Likewise, which container is it going to use and what's it going to put in that container? And then finally, well, how much time is it going to wait for? Robolab is unique and has default settings for everything. So if I go into actually help, and I show the context help, I'll bring up a window here, and it'll actually tell you these various things. Let me bring that up where you can see it. And so this says, well, the default is to wait for the light sensor on port 1 has increased by 5. So it's telling you what the default is. We said, well, what port? Well, it's telling you, port 1. How much? 5. It's got a default. Likewise, I said, well, what container? Well, it's going to use the red container, and it's going to fill with the value of 1. Well, how much time? Well, it's going to say default is for 1 second. So it actually tells you the defaults for everything in here, so in case you're wondering. Now, you'll learn those pretty quickly. But typically speaking, I want to overwrite those. So I'm going to close this just to get it out of the way. And the way you overwrite those is you use the modifiers palette, and it's over here on the far right-hand side. If I click on that, I get this palette here, which has lots of modifiers. This allows me to change, in one nice place, allows me to change all those default settings. Anything that you want to change the default setting is found here on the modifiers palette. And the modifiers palette is roughly divided in half. And the things over on the left-hand side here, I will say these are the things that get operated on. So if I want to fill a container, I've got to operate on a container. I have to specify which container, red, blue, or yellow. So I'm operating on a container, and the things on the right-hand side are the things I operate with. So I would fill it with a number, for example. So if I want to fill the blue container with the number 20, I would say here, I go here 20, and I got to wire that in. Spacebar there, wire that guy in. And so now I'm filling that blue container with the number 20. So I'm operating on the blue container, and I'm operating with the number 20, where the guy doing all the work is the actual function. So I'm operating on the blue, operating with the number 20. I don't have to use a constant here. I can use pretty much anything on this right-hand side. I could say, well, I want to fill the blue container with the value of the red container. So I'm operating on the blue container. I'm using the value of the red container. Now, the red container hasn't been defined, so that wouldn't make much sense, but it's okay. You could get over those obstacles a little bit. I could also say, for example, I want to use the value of light sensor, or of the port number 1. So I go in here and say, I want to operate on the blue container. I want to fill the blue container with whatever is on port 1. If it's a light sensor, let's say it's reading 50, I would fill the blue container with the number 50. So I'm operating with whatever is the value on port 1. Now, the number one rookie mistake I see is basically this. Is they say, okay, I want to use light sensor 1. Yeah, that's kind of what you're doing, but by default it's using light sensor 1. Now you've wired it into this blue one, which is the wait for change. So let's say your light sensor is reading 50. Light sensor 1 is reading 50. The way this program is going to read is, okay, it's going to use light sensor 1, and it's going to wait for 50 change. If you're currently at 50 and you're going to wait for 50 more, you're going to wait for it to get to 100, which just doesn't happen. So that won't quite do what you want to do. It'll compile and download just fine, but it won't do what you want to do. You're not waiting for light sensor 1. You are waiting for light sensor 1, but you're also waiting for it to change by the value on light sensor 1. So whatever that current value, if it's 35, it's going to the current value is 35. It's going to wait for it to get to 70 because it's going to wait for 35 more. So we don't want to do that, typically speaking. Typically speaking, the way you're going to do that is you're going to say, okay, I'm going to use light sensor 1, and I'm going to wait for it to change by, I don't know, nice numbers like 10 or something. Okay, you have to go ahead and just get those bad wires, and you would go in and wire these guys in, and that's the way it normally works. Whoops, missed it there. And that's the way it normally works. So now I'm going to wait for light sensor 1 to change by a value of 10. And so the color coding gives you some idea. Where these big thick wires, all these ones you'll see on the left-hand side are all using thick wires, and those are defining what's being operated on, and all these ones on the right-hand side all use these tiny, tiny blue wires. Those are defining what you're operating with. So the color coding actually makes some sense for this for Robolab.